course, the world has been also looking at the Russia-Ukraine crisis, which to an extent is also a contributing factor to the fuel price hike. Russian President Vladimir Putin has put his nuclear deterrent forces on high alert. This as the war in neighbouring Ukraine continues. Putin said this was a response to what he called unfriendly actions by the West. But what does this mean, and should we be worried about this development? Joining me now to talk about this is Africa-Asia analyst Thembisa Fakude and senior researcher at the Institute for Global Dialogue, Faith Mabera. Good evening to you, and thank you very much for your time. Thembisa, let's begin with you. First and foremost, let's talk about this latest development, the South African diplomats leaving Ukraine over safety fears. Is this an indication of anything in particular that we should be worried about?
Yeah, it's quite concerning, of course, but one would have expected that they would leave in protest because of the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. But of course, they've left because of those safety concerns, and it's valid concerns. We have seen today reports that there's a convoy of Russian military which from the sky looked as 30 miles long convoy of military armed vehicles heading towards Kyiv. So it's a concerning development at the moment, and one would have expected, of course, that South Africans, like the rest of people and other diplomatic missions in Ukraine, are living that, particularly Kyiv, are living Kyiv because of this imminent attack that is coming towards them.
Yeah. Faith, did Vladimir Putin underestimate the kind of resistance he would be getting in the Ukraine?
I think it did.
Sorry, Thembisa. Let's bring Faith here. We'll come back to you now.
Yeah. It seems that the Ukrainian forces, and obviously with the assistance of the West and NATO forces, NATO help assistance, are certainly mounting a very strong resistance against the military aggression by Russia. And it's interesting because it seems to be the case that the military strategy is floundering. They thought that it would be a quick, almost blitzkrieg against the Ukrainian forces, that it would be a quick war, but it's turning into a situation where the Ukrainian forces it looks poised to certainly turn into a situation of urban guerrilla warfare, launching attacks from the thicket of the urban sort of terrain, and also the fact that Putin now has put forward his nuclear threat card certainly points to a level of desperation, a level of frustration to his particular endgame in this case with Ukraine. So it's interesting to see just the kind of responses, not only in terms of the economic and sanction and the military force that's being waged against him, but also from a psychological warfare perspective. I think those are the two elements of why we are seeing now the nuclear threat card being put in our faces now.
Yeah. Thembisa, why would Putin threaten nuclear, or at least brandish it about, saying, well, I'm putting them on high alert? I mean, first and foremost, one analysis says, if you look at Russia's been preparing for this war. They've got their toys for boys, which they designed themselves, they manufactured, they implemented them on the ground, they implemented them in the air, they implemented them on sea. They don't need money from anywhere. They got these at bargain basement prices, and they are using them sparingly, and they're using them strategically. Why would he want to brandish this idea of nuclear forces being on high alert as a deterrent?
Well, he was responding to those harsh sanctions that were implemented by the Europeans and Americans over the weekend, and that's one. Number two is this is a continuation of these bullying tactics that is embraced since the attack on Ukraine started. So now it's not only threatening Ukraine, but it's threatening the entire region and indirectly threatening the entire world. But we see now the effects of his actions trickling down to countries like South Africa, where we're going to have the war is going to impact on on energy prices, and is going to impact on our economy as the world because of this continuing irresponsible behavior by Vladimir Putin. So the whole thing about putting the army on the nuclear high alert is mainly to continue bullying all of us, and it's not only now the Europeans and Americans that are going to be threatened by this, notwithstanding, of course, that there's still very few long-range missiles that will reach us in South Africa, but the longest at the moment is 4,700 kilometers, so it can reach anywhere, including the United States. So it's part of that bullying tactic and the intimidation of the entire world with the intention of collapsing the global economy as they started doing. But one hopes, of course, that before that can be effected, the Russian economy will collapse first.
Is there a degree of predictability in this military takeover when you look at the strategy used, for example, in Crimea, in the takeover of Crimea, where for example, the communication of Crimea was exposed and certainly compromised, and Putin seemed to have, of course, interfered there and used that as his weapon to win the war?
Sorry, I missed the first part. Is that directed at me?
Yes, Faith, you can take that as well. Is there a degree of predictability in the military strategy that Russia is using in this conflict with the Ukraine?
Putin is turning out to be a high-stakes gambler in this case, and it's very difficult in this, particularly in the fog of war, to pinpoint exactly what's its end game. So far, as analysts, what the best we can do is certainly speculate. But it's been a long time coming. In fact, talking about just the build-up to the war, in addition to almost the shock and awe strategy that Russia has employed, launching its special military operation, as it calls it, on the 24th of February. Prior to that, if we go almost a week before that, on the 19th, remember that there was also a very interesting display of the Russian nuclear offensive in Belarus, the exercise that Russia had with Belarus, and this almost seemed to be Putin sort of also putting on a strong display of military threat. But it's interesting. I suppose the question also is if he's drawing from that same playbook. I'd say there's a bit of evolution in the case that when you look at the circumstances about the aggression, there's very nuanced levels about what his endgame is with Ukraine. Because if the endgame, for instance, is that he wants to make sure that the Ukraine not only serves as a buffer between Russia and the West and NATO, then that would mean that his stakes are raised in the sense that he would not, for instance, value infrastructure. It would almost be, like I said, a blitzkrieg bombing into oblivion. But if the case is that he just wants to use it almost for messaging value and to ensure that the European security order is transformed, then that also carries a different sort of set of cards. So the end game here is what we are all sort of speculating about. We are all waiting to see what happens. But the implications, obviously, for the broader European, for the former Soviet states, for instance, and who are fearing for their security and thinking what next, and for the kind of destabilization that we have in Europe, is what we can sort of pinpoint. But end game and strategy remains very murky in terms of the fog of war.
Thembisa, what do you make of Turkey now making the call for Russia to cease fire in the Ukraine?
Well, Turkey is part of NATO, and I guess Erdogan is more interested now in also exploiting the opportunities of sitting on top of the food chain, particularly in the region, especially in the Black Sea. He had announced last week that they are going to block the Russian warships from passing through the Black Sea. So he wants to be noted as one of the leaders who contributed towards at least discouraging Putin from going on with this war. But again, I think he's also entrenching his position within NATO because he's the most proximate to action outside Europeans. So he sits between Europe and Asia. And he's got much more bigger muscle because of the waters that he shares not only with Ukraine and Russia, but with other major players within the region. So he's, I think he's standing up to be counted, like the rest who are currently doing. Of course, it's disappointing that you have countries like United Arab Emirates deciding to join the wrong side of history. But I think Turkey is mainly standing up in this regard to be counted as one of those who did the right thing, and they'll be counted as being on the right side of history.
Yeah. Speaking of being on the right side of history, Thembisa, what do you make of Zelensky's plea to China?
Well, the speech was, I mean, it got the standing ovation. And Lavrov, on the other hand, when he was trying to address the UN, he had a walkout. So Zelensky remains a hero because of the strategy that is embraced, particularly taking those selfies on the streets of Kiev, basically assuring the people that he's still around and is going to be fighting on. So he remains celebrated at the moment, and the fact that the entire European Parliament gave him a standing ovation after that speech, again, kind of emboldened his current position as the leader who standing firm against a bully from next door.
Yeah, but would China's influence here make any difference?
Well, China will definitely play a very important role, notwithstanding that, of course, China is a strong ally of Russia, and they're seen now to be two big nations standing against the United States. But also China and Russia are part of BRICS, so they are likely to continue with that uniform reaction. But China, of course, the foreign policy of China is based by and large on business. The Belt and Road Initiative suggests, at least to me, that they will need to have a positive and amicable relationship with all the countries, particularly in Eurasia. So they can't really afford to mess up their relationships with the European countries, because their foreign policies, by and large, dictated by business, and this Belt Road Initiative, which they've embraced over the years, requires them to continue with a very, strong foreign policy initiatives in all of those countries, particularly with the rail part of their business. So I don't think they will really stand with Putin, because, as I said, they need relations with these countries, and their business will have to go through from China all the way to Indian Ocean, coming into Kenya, all the way up North Africa until it reaches the far western part of Europe and Asia. So I doubt if they will stand firm with Russia. I've already seen their voting pattern, which is something not new. They've decided to abstain, which again tells you that they don't want to get involved in the business of supporting Vladimir Putin.
Yeah. Thembisa Fakude, I appreciate your time. Faith Mabera, thank you very much for coming through tonight here on In Focus. So we continue.